All right, so, you've sent over some really interesting stuff for us to look at today about EFT, ADP, the emotional freedom technique, and also the law of attraction.
Yeah.
And I think what we really want to get to by the end of this is not just understanding each of these on their own, but how they might actually work together to help people sort of, move towards what they want in life, their goals and aspirations and all that.
Exactly. Yeah, the material you shared really delves into EFT as this kind of fascinating combination.
Right.
It brings in talking therapies, those kinds of psychological approaches, but then it adds in this really interesting physical element, which
Yeah.
is this gentle tapping on specific points on the body.
Okay.
And the idea is that this can help to really sort of ease that psychological stress and emotional discomfort that we all experience from time to time.
Yeah.
And then you've got the law of attraction, which is this whole other concept that suggests our thoughts and our feelings.
Hmm.
They're not just internal things. They actually have an impact on the reality we experience, that positive energy can kind of attract positive outcomes.
Right. So it's that idea that like attracts like in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
So the question that keeps coming up for me as I'm looking at the stuff is how do these two fit together? Because they seem very different on the surface.
Yeah.
And your sources hint at something really key here, which is that maybe those deep-seated beliefs we have, the subconscious stuff, that those can actually act like roadblocks when it comes to the law of attraction. And
Yeah.
that maybe EFT offers a way to kind of clear those blocks.
Exactly.
So, okay, so let's start with just really breaking down EFT.
Right.
Like, what is the core of how this technique actually works? When someone's doing EFT, what are they doing?
So the really interesting thing about EFT is this mechanism at its core, and it involves focusing your attention very specifically on certain thoughts that you're having and the emotions that those thoughts are triggering.
Mm-hmm.
And while you're focusing on that, you're physically tapping on particular meridian points on your body.
Oh,
And the sources you provided actually do a great job of laying out where those points are.
right.
You've got the top of the head, the eyebrows, the side of the eyes, under the eyes, the chin, the collarbone, and then under the arms.
It's interesting to me that there's a physical action tied to this. It's
Yeah.
not just about thinking or talking. You're actually doing something with your body.
Exactly.
Why those points, though? What's the connection there?
Yeah, so these points are believed to correspond with energy pathways in the body,
Okay.
which are very similar to the kind of pathways that are recognized in practices like acupuncture.
Right.
And the idea is that by tapping on these points,
Mm-hmm.
you're helping to sort of restore balance or release any blockages or disruptions in these energy flows. And these energy flows are thought to be really interconnected with our emotional states.
Okay, so it's working on like a psychological level by focusing on the issue, but then also this kind of physical level by stimulating these points.
Exactly. It's a therapeutic approach that's really bridging that mind-body connection.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating here is how this might actually be impacting our nervous system's response to emotional triggers, like when we get stressed or anxious.
Right.
Some of the research suggests that this combination of focusing your attention and this physical stimulation can actually help to downregulate that stress response.
Okay, that's a much deeper layer to it than just sort of generally energy flow,
Yeah.
That makes more sense to me.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about EFT a bit. Let's shift gears and talk about the law of attraction.
I
We hear this phrase a lot, like in popular culture and self-help and all that.
Yes.
So in the context of your sources, like what's the essential idea, the basic gist of the law of attraction?
So the fundamental principle of the law of attraction as is presented in the material you've shared is this.
Mm-hmm.
There's this powerful connection between our inner world, so what we're thinking about predominantly, the feelings that we're experiencing most of the time, and the external reality that we experience in our lives.
Okay.
So it's that idea that like attracts like, meaning the energetic vibration that we're putting out through our thoughts and emotions, that's essentially what we're drawing back into our lives.
So if you're constantly dwelling on positive thoughts and you're really working on cultivating those positive emotions, then essentially you're broadcasting a positive signal, and that will attract more positive experiences, more things that resonate with that.
Yeah, that's the core concept.
Okay.
And maintaining that predominantly positive inner state is seen as really crucial for attracting positive outcomes in your life.
But this is where it gets tricky, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because we've all tried to, think happy thoughts and sometimes it doesn't seem to work or doesn't seem to be enough. So what's the missing piece there?
Well, the sources you shared really highlight a critical point,
Okay.
which is that often, beneath the surface, our subconscious mind it's holding on to a lot of stuff.
Okay.
All kinds of limiting beliefs and unresolved emotional baggage from the past.
Yeah.
And these can actually act as very significant obstacles to the law of attraction.
Okay.
It's like there's this strong undercurrent that's working against all the positive intentions you're trying to set.
So even if you're consciously trying to think at happy thoughts, put out that good vibe, these deeply ingrained negative beliefs are still there,
Right.
possibly undermining your efforts to
Exactly.
attract those good
And
things.
this is where EFT comes in.
Okay.
It can provide a really valuable tool for directly addressing and releasing these really deeply held internal obstacles.
Okay.
So by focusing on these negative beliefs and the emotions that go along with them,
Mm.
all that stuff, we tend to push down. While you're tapping, you can actually start to reduce their intensity and the hold they have over your emotional state.
So it's almost like EFT is helping to clear the internal noise so that the signal of the law of attraction can be transmitted more clearly.
That's a great way to put it.
So by resolving that inner resistance.
Right.
Okay, so your source material actually gives a really relatable example, with this woman named Jane, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you walk us through how this might play out for someone like her? Like, what would that actually look like?
Sure. So Jane, she has a clear goal.
Mm-hmm.
She wants a promotion at work.
Okay.
And that aligns with, setting a positive intention with the law of attraction, right?
Yeah.
But she keeps having these feelings of self-doubt
Okay.
and this really deep-seated belief that she's just not worthy of that kind of success.
Mm-hmm.
And according to the law of attraction, these recurring negative thought patterns and feelings, they're essentially sending out a negative energetic vibration,
Right.
which could actually be hindering her career progress.
Okay.
It's almost like she's attracting situations that reinforce those feelings of unworthiness.
Yeah, that whole self-sabotaging cycle.
Exactly.
So how could EFT step in and help someone like Jane break free from that?
So with EFT, Jane would specifically target those feelings of unworthiness
Okay.
while she's tapping on those meridian points that we talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
And the process would involve acknowledging those feelings, either out loud or just to herself.
Okay.
Saying something like, even though I feel unworthy of this promotion,
Mm-hmm.
and then pairing that with a statement of self-acceptance, something like, I deeply and completely accept myself anyway.
Okay.
And the idea is that the tapping can actually help to disrupt the emotional charge that's associated with that belief.
So it's not about pretending you don't feel that way. It's
Yeah.
about acknowledging it, but then also trying to shift it somehow.
Exactly, yeah.
So what would be the desired outcome of this process for Jane? What are we aiming for here?
The ultimate goal is to really diminish the power that those negative beliefs about her worthiness have over her.
Okay.
And as Jane consistently uses EFT to address these feelings,
Mm-hmm.
the intensity of the self-doubt and those feelings of being unworthy, they should lessen over time.
Right.
And that shift in her internal landscape,
Mm.
that can then allow her to cultivate a more positive and self-assured mindset,
Okay.
which would be more in alignment with her aspirations.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, according to the law of attraction, more likely to attract those positive opportunities and the recognition that she's seeking.
It's almost like she's not just wishing for the promotion.
Right.
She's actively trying to dismantle the internal barriers that might be preventing it from happening.
Exactly.
Now, often when we talk about these kinds of techniques, I think people wonder about the science behind it.
Yeah.
Do your sources shed any light on the scientific basis of EFT? Like, is there any research to back this up?
Yeah, they do. The material you provided actually mentions that there's a growing body of scientific research
Yeah.
that supports the effectiveness of EFT.
Okay.
Specifically, it highlights studies that have shown that EFT can lead to significant reductions in people's reported levels of stress and anxiety.
That's great.
Yeah. And it also references research indicating that the very act of tapping on these specific pressure points can really help to regulate the body's stress response and kind of help you manage that emotional intensity.
Okay. That's reassuring to know that it's not just based on anecdotal evidence. There's actually some research being done.
Right.
So we've explored kind of the theory behind both of these. We've looked at an example. We've talked a little bit about the science backing up EFT.
Yeah.
And your source material even gives a little taste of what it might feel like to actually do EFT. I'm wondering if maybe you could guide our listener through just a really basic conceptual version of that.
Sure.
They won't be tapping along at home or anything, but they can just sort of follow along in their minds,
Exactly.
get a sense of the process.
Okay. So first, I want you to bring to mind a specific issue that's been bothering you. or maybe a negative belief that you've been aware of.
Okay.
Something that's kind of been weighing on you.
Mm-hmm.
And just allow yourself to acknowledge it for a moment, without judgment.
Okay, so hopefully our listeners have got something in mind.
Yeah.
What's next in this little conceptual tapping session?
So now imagine a scale from 0 to 10,
Okay.
with 10 being the most intense.
Mm-hmm.
How strong does that feeling or belief feel to you right now?
Okay.
And just make a mental note of that number.
Got it.
Okay. So now there's a point on the side of your hand, right between your wrist and your little finger.
Okay.
It's often called the karate chop point.
Right.
And I want you to imagine gently tapping on that area with your other hand.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, mentally repeat this phrase a few times. Even though I feel, and here you would insert the emotion that you identified, I deeply and completely accept myself.
So we're acknowledging the negative feeling, but also pairing it with self-acceptance. Exactly.
Okay, I can picture that in my mind.
Good.
So what comes after the setup phrase and the karate chop point?
So next we're going to move through a sequence of other tapping points.
Okay.
And these are on your face and upper body.
Mm-hmm.
So start by imagining tapping at the top of your head.
Okay.
Then move to the beginning of your eyebrow.
Okay.
Then the side of your eye, right on that bone.
Mm-hmm.
Then under your eye, on the bone.
Got it.
Under your nose.
Okay.
On your chin, right in that crease.
Mm-hmm.
Then on your collarbone, about an inch down, and to the side from that U-shaped notch at the base of your neck.
Right.
And then finally under your arm, about 4 inches below your armpit.
Okay.
And as you're focusing on each of these points, just mentally tapping on them,
Mm-hmm.
the idea is to either silently or aloud express any thoughts and emotions that come up that are related to that initial issue or belief that you identified.
So it's like holding that thought in your awareness while also doing this imagined physical action on these specific points.
Yeah, exactly.
And once you've gone through all of those tapping points,
Mm-hmm.
take a deep breath and just mentally reassess the intensity of that feeling or belief, again, on that same 0 to 10 scale.
Okay.
And even just with this conceptual exercise, you might notice a little bit of a shift
Right.
in how you're feeling about it.
And in a real EFT session, you would repeat this a bunch of times.
Yeah, typically you would repeat that sequence, focusing on any discomfort that's still there until the intensity decreases significantly.
Wow, it's like a very gentle but very focused way to address those emotional charges, those things that we carry with us.
Right.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, I think it would be good to just kind of hit the main takeaways for our listeners about this connection between EFT and the law of attraction, based on everything that we've talked about.
Okay, so I think the fundamental takeaway here is the potential that emerges when you integrate these two approaches. So EFT can be this really practical and accessible way to start clearing out those internal obstacles, the limiting beliefs, and those unprocessed emotions that often get in the way of effectively using the law of attraction to manifest your desires.
So it's not enough to just think positively. You have to address this deeper stuff first.
Exactly.
Okay.
And by doing that, you're essentially creating a clearer pathway for that positive energy to flow.
And for your intentions to actually manifest in the real world.
Yeah, and I think this integration really empowers you to take a more active role in shaping your reality. It's not just passively hoping for things, but actually doing something to align your inner world with what you want to experience externally.
Right.
And the material really stresses that consistent practice with EFT and being kind to yourself throughout the process, having self-compassion. That's really key to unlocking this potential for transformation and really setting yourself on that positive trajectory towards your goals.
That's a really empowering message. It suggests that we actually have more agency than we sometimes think when it comes to creating the life that we want.
Yeah, I agree.
So to kind of sum up our deep dive into EFT and the law of attraction, it seems like the real magic happens when you use EFT to address those underlying blocks that might be preventing the positive from fully manifesting in your life.
Absolutely. By understanding how EFT can help you clear out those limiting beliefs and unresolved emotions, you can really start to see how it can enhance your ability to align with and attract the positive experiences you're looking for.
This has been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, it has.
And given what we've talked about, about the connection between our emotional state and what we tend to attract into our lives, I want to leave you with this thought, our listener.
Okay.
What's one small negative feeling or recurring thought that you might be willing to just gently explore this week, maybe with a few rounds of tapping, whether it's conceptual or actual tapping,
Mm,
and how might releasing even a little bit of that negativity potentially shift your overall perspective?
that's a great question to consider.
It's something to really think about.
Yeah.
So we encourage you to delve deeper into both of these, EFT and the law of attraction, based on what we've talked about today.
Yeah, explore it.
And thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.